So today I'm going to share 4 tips to improve your bird photography. The first one is exposure, then composition or cropping, contrast, and color. So if you're getting into bird photography, get ready for some challenges. Your subject is very unpredictable. It could be up on a tree, behind some branches, on the ground. Wherever it is, it's probably spotted you and trying to stay away from you. So, even if you have a long lens, it's very difficult to actually have the animal fill your frame. So, challenging conditions require you to, bring your images into your favorite editor and make some adjustments. And for those adjustments, I wanted to give you 4 quick tips that if you keep those in mind, I can promise your pictures will be more compelling. So in order to illustrate this, I wanted to bring up this image I shot in Alaska, Haines, Alaska, and it's a juvenile bald eagle. And to go through this image to make it more compelling, the 4 things that I want you to remember are this. First is exposure. The second one is composition or cropping. The third one is contrast. And the fourth one is color. So we're going to go through those so that you understand what the basic thought process is. So on this image, the important elements here is the eagle. And in bird photography, even though there can be many factors that contribute to how good your image is, in many cases it tends to surround the eyes, the expression of the animal as we try to connect with it. So I tend to make that an important piece in my editing process to make sure that spot on the photograph is compelling. So in this case, this image is a little bit on the dark side. I can see it by looking at the general kind of tones of the image, and also by looking at the histogram. I'm seeing that most of the pixels are on the dark side here. So I'm going to start playing with the exposure slider, but making sure that I don't go overboard, because there are some white feathers here, and white feathers that are probably showing up here in the histogram as this kind of small amount of white pixels are starting to be pretty close to the edge here. And if you start bringing the exposure up and these pixels start moving towards the brighter side and they start going up, beyond this limit, then you start losing details in the white pixels. You don't want to lose the details in the white feathers. So I need to be careful and just making sure that I keep a good eye on the overall tone, because we're making global adjustments here. So I'm going to start moving the exposure slider until I kind of start seeing the face and the eye, the contour of the eye come up a little more. So let's see, let's go overboard a little bit. That's too much, of course. So I'm going to roll this back. I'm going to dial this back down. And I think at that point, let's see, that might be a pretty good spot right there. Maybe a little less. Okay, I think that's a good spot. I can see the contour of the eye a little more clearly, and the feathers are still kind of within, reasonable range. It's not unnaturally white, and I have a little more definition on the darker tones here. So that's for exposure. Let's look at quickly the cropping. So cropping here, which is the second letter that I want you to remember, we want to make sure that we frame the shot so that we keep the important elements. We want to remove any distractions, anything that makes it harder for the viewer to read the image. And in this case, I really like the mossy rock underneath the eagle, and maybe this larger rock in the back, but not too much so that it doesn't compete too much with my subject. So I'm going to start cropping in a little bit like that, and then adjusting, moving the subject down here. And I like these rocks down here. It adds a little bit of depth compared to the background here. So I think, and I don't want to put the animal smack in the middle either, although there is a nice kind of visual weight given by these 3 elements, the big rock, the one underneath, and the animal. There's a nice triangle here that weighs in towards the bottom left, and that's kind of balanced out with the negative space up here. But let's see, let's just leave it like this for now and crop in. And all of a sudden my image is much more focused, right? We can see more of the eye. It's more about the bird itself. So this is starting to go into a really nice direction here. So that's for cropping. The third element I wanted to talk about is contrast. If I grab my contrast slider and bring it to the top, I can see that I have, my dark shadows are pushed to blacks, and whatever was white or close to white was pushed towards the extreme whites. That's what a contrasty image is. And if I do the contrary, I see that the opposite happens, right? I get no blacks and no pure whites. So having some contrast in the image is important. If you're supposed to have dark or black pixels in the image, make sure that those black pixels are reaching the edge of your histogram. And if you're supposed to have pure white pixels in your image, that you do have some pixels that are very close to the right edge here, which are the bright pixels. Okay, so that's to make sure that you have a right range of tones in your image that makes it pop. That's what makes your image become more interesting in general. It's not a rule, an absolute rule, but in general, having a good contrast in your image makes it more appealing to the eye. Starting from where it was, which was 0, if I start bringing it up, you see how the image starts to have a little more punch, right? The shadows start to be a little darker, so it becomes a little more dramatic, but I don't want to go too far because then I start losing way too much details in the wings and the feathers, right? So I want to dial it back, and I want to get to a point where it's actually a nice, subtle adjustment, but that makes the image pop more. So I think that's a good spot right there. So that was for contrast, and the last one is color. So color in this case, like I said before, this was an overcast day, so a lot of the colors are going to be subdued, and the best way for me to actually bring back some of the saturation for the colors is to use the vibrance slider here, because what it does is that it increases the saturation on the pixels that have the least saturation, as opposed to increasing saturation on all the pixels. And what that does is that it avoids you to go really overboard on the colors that are already kind of saturated. So this is the best starting point. So take the vibrance slider and start to bring it up. And again, I like to go overboard and then dial it back, and I like to go up and down until I see a really good realistic medium, right? So I'm gonna maybe dial it back just a little bit more, and that seems to be a pretty decent space. So that's for color. So again, the 4 things: exposure, cropping, contrast, and color. And if we compare with the original version, this was the original one, and this is the final one. So this, to me, is more compelling, more focused, easier for the eye to read, and your image just becomes stronger, I think. So I hope these 4 tips are going to help you in your post-processing workflow. And thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next video.